difference that you'll see is that it will show up as a little box, but that means it will take all of the different files that it normally has, so all of this stuff you see here, and it'll put it into just one file that you can just drag and drop into anything you want to share it with other people. Just as long as you do that, you can share it with anyone you want. I'm not sure why it's going.
I'm not sure why it's going.
Yep, and I will keep an eye on the chat. Leia, could you try muting your mic when you're not talking, just in case that's the echo? And then whatever you want to talk, just turn it back on. Let's see, I'm not sure if it could be, I don't think it could be anything else. There we go. I think that fixed it. Perfect. All right, so besides that, a couple other really basic things, Keisha. One really important thing is there's a difference in this between what are called panels, which are these individual things. And then there's also a different thing called a scene. A scene is one camera setup. So that means that it's basically this frame and all of the camera movements you can do, which is this little button here, which we'll talk about later. If you have something in the same scene, then it always keeps track of your camera movements. So we can have this camera like shoot up in the air for no reason. But the second we go to a new scene, which you can do by going up here, and instead of selecting this, which is new panel, that just adds a new panel, you hit this one, new scene. It'll ask you to name the scene. If you've got another scene after it, doesn't really matter. Then it takes this camera, which is moved all the way up here. I'll delete this. Camera moves up, and then it snaps back down to center. It's super duper important to remember it. And you always want to create a new scene whenever you change the camera. So basic idea there is if you've got a character standing in front of a bed, and your first shot, like here, is them standing directly in front of the bed, and then your next shot, you want them to be moved off to the side of the bed, then that would be considered a change of the camera angle, which is literally just you imagining the camera at a different position. It's not actually setting up a new camera other than making it a new scene. And with that, it means that you have your first camera view, all your crazy camera moves there, and then you can have a new one, and you can have new crazy camera moves here. So for example, we might decide that instead, this camera is going to shoot way up in the air for no reason. So now this is its own camera move, and it doesn't affect this camera move. That's basically the most important thing to remember about making the difference between panels and scenes. Any questions on that basic stuff between panels and scenes? Yeah, a scene can be any number of camera moves, but they're all connected camera moves. Like, let's say that I wanted to make a new camera move. So right here, this black line right here is one camera move. It's this weird pan up into the side that I do. But let's say that I want another camera move, and I want this one to be like a really nauseating loop-de-loop. Those camera moves are connected, and they affect each other. So does that make sense, Anna Maria? Got you, Leia. I'll wait. Yep, the dimensions, or the diamonds down here, if I zoom in, these diamonds are camera keyframes, so they indicate the start and end position for a camera. And you can actually drag those around to indicate how quickly you want the camera to move. And then you can connect camera moves between different panels in the same scene. Yep. So if you want to make a new camera move for a different camera angle, you would make a new scene. But if you want to connect the camera moves like this, where it does this crazy loop-de-loop, all in the same scene, you would keep it in the same scene. On the other hand, right, like over here, we'll move these out of the way. Or I'll move this out of the way. Over here, the camera resets, and then it does a new camera move because I made a new scene. And Leia, are you back? Can you hear me? Okay, so making camera moves is super duper easy. There's this button over here. It's a little camera that shows two lines connected, or two dots connected by a line. You click on this and make sure you're on what's called Tool Properties Color. When you want to make what is called a new camera keyframe, you can hit this button. This starts it at the beginning of a panel. So let's actually do it on a new one. So if you look down here at this one super long panel, when I hit this button, it makes a little diamond at the very beginning of the frame. If I hit the other one at the very end, it adds a keyframe to the very end of the frame. Now I've got a green camera frame. This indicates the start camera position. And I've got a red camera frame. That is the ending camera position. So this one at the beginning is green, and this one at the end is red. So what that would look like is the camera would move from left to right, from green to red, because I've made those two camera keyframes. And it's super easy to move the camera. All you do is you grab the center and you move whichever one wherever you want. So green, again, is start. Let's say I want to start it on the exclamation point. And then to symbolize extreme confusion, I might go all the way up to the second camera keyframe and put a question mark. And so now it moves from exclamation to question mark between my two camera keyframes. So is that clear? Awesome. The other important thing to know about the camera is that you can also make stuff larger or smaller. What you do there is you grab this little anchor point on the upper left-hand side of the camera keyframe, and if you make it bigger for the ending keyframe, then you will start like this. You will start as a little free keyframe, and you will get to a much bigger keyframe. Or you can make it much smaller, and then you will start as a big keyframe and get to a much smaller one. So that's what you would do for truck in and truck out. You know, you might want to get really intense on someone's face, for example. So you might start with them really small in the frame, looking kind of angry far away, and then you might have the camera zoom in super dramatically because, I don't know, story reasons. Whoops, that's animation. So you might have the red keyframe, which is your second keyframe, zoom in super close on just their eyes. Like that. Bam. Evil. And then last important thing, well, there's a couple more important things with camera. And that is a good question. I will say, as soon as you get used to the camera, you'll probably end up using it all the time anyways. So, yeah, exactly. A couple other important things about camera to know. Sometimes you might want the camera to move in something other than a perfect straight line, right? You might be following something that's actually curving. Say you want the camera to follow a curved line that's connecting these two things. You can actually do that by grabbing that blue line and fitting it to a curve. You can actually even make nodes for that curve. This gets really, really, really janky if you do too many nodes, and it can be really sickening to actually look at the actual camera move, so be careful with it, but it does work, and it's useful for like slow sweeps and stuff like that. Because now, woo, it follows things all the way in. Like this. And then last thing with camera that I would include is you can actually make multiple keyframes. Yep, you can see all your camera moves at once. It gives you these little square nodes that you see just indicate that the camera is moving differently, but you're not setting a totally new keyframe. You're just indicating the space it should move through. The diamonds indicate starting and ending keyframes. It's these. And the great thing about it is it connects everything together. So if I decide that I really actually wanted this to do something crazy, like I can twist the camera frame as well, then I can have it actually corkscrew in some sort of crazy, horrible fashion, and it follows everything perfectly. Again, stuff can get really nauseating if you just mess around with it without checking, so I always recommend you actually check what the camera move is doing, because sometimes you'll set up something you think looks cool, and then you'll try it, and it'll make you want to puke. One other important thing is you can actually set multiple camera keyframes. So you have your normal starting and ending keyframe, which would go for the full length of a panel, or for a scene if you want to have it across multiple panels or connect multiple moves. But even within a single frame, you can actually make multiple camera moves. So here I have green, blue, and red. And I can move each of these independently, and it basically does the same thing as your normal movement nodes. But with this, you can do stuff like you can make the middle frame much smaller and then the two other frames bigger. So you can zoom in, zoom out, weird stuff like that. It's useful if you have a character that's going to move to like 3 separate points on the same in the same scene. Like they might start. Let's make a new one. They might start here. They might go up some stairs. And then they might come back down some stairs and get way closer to the camera. And if that's the case, then it's as simple as going to camera, start, end, and then selecting somewhere in the middle. And then you just space those 3 out. So the blue would go here, red would go here, and you might make the red bigger. And then follows all 3 of those and gives you your full camera move. And I'm not used to using camera view, so I keep expecting it to snap to my frame like it does in stage view, which is why I keep having it framed weirdly. So moving on from camera stuff, because it's basically just a matter of playing around with what works, you can do things like ease in and ease out, where it starts and ends slower. I guess he wants us to move in camera view. I'm not sure what the particular advantage is, but I'm sure there's a good industry reason for it. Let's find out. Test it out, exclamation point. Very well. All right. So like I said, there's ease in and ease out. This stuff is nice if you want something to start slow and build up fast, but honestly, it's just a matter of playing around with it. It can be pretty finicky, and I'm not a humongous fan of it. Something I will say, if you're ever interested in doing action board stuff, you can actually just make a ton of camera keyframes to simulate camera shake. By moving camera keyframes around just a little bit, you can make basically as many as you want. And then the further you have them spaced apart in the timeline and the further they sort of move from each other, the more severe the camera shake will be. So if I play this, it shakes around really lazily, but it's a way of getting camera shake in Storyboard Pro without having to export it to something else and get super annoyed with it, which can be helpful sometimes. Sure. Stage view. The reason I like stage view is because it snaps to the frame. So like if I put boop, this and then I move across my timeline, it actually snaps it to full frame, which is super awesome compared to camera view, which stays back and lets you see the full frame all the time, which can be useful for stuff like this, where it stays really far away and you can see everything, especially if you have this off, right? It just follows the camera locked on. Whereas, again, in stage view, if I do the same thing, it locks to basically a full thing. It does this. Sorry for all the coffee sipping. Alrighty. So if you leave stage view in full size, then you see it without the frame popping around. Do you mean by that if I leave it here, I always zoom in and out because I'm doing camera moves a lot. So I actually like that. Plus, I pull way far away when I'm doing, goodness me, ASMR, huh? Here I am doing ASMR without even realizing it. I've always really liked doing stuff in camera view because I can pull really far away for doing like a big camera pan or whatever, and then it snaps in when I want to check it, which is something I like, but I understand using camera view as well. It can be useful. Doesn't look as dramatic. That's true. I guess for pitching, it might actually be better to stick in camera view, but I guess for my own personal stuff, I'll probably stay with the other. All right, so that's about all that I have on the camera. You can do a bunch of other stuff. You can add exact durations and things. Actually, there's one other thing I will say. You can actually click and drag camera keyframes to make things longer and shorter within a frame or across a scene. This is another big difference between scenes and panels. So let's go ahead and I guess we'll just keep that stuff. If I make a new scene and I have some sort of a cliff and someone standing at it and they look quite happy. And then I duplicate that layer. Then I make a camera keyframe. There we go. At the beginning of this and then the end. And I have it just go up a little bit. Then it goes for this one panel and that's it. But if I click on the ending keyframe and drag it across the second panel, then it goes across both, which means that the camera move now takes twice as long and goes across both panels in the scene. However, if I make a new scene and I try to drag that camera keyframe to the new one, it doesn't work. So it preserves the camera position of your last panel in the first scene and doesn't let it taint the second one because it's assuming that you're making a new scene that has a new camera position. So that's something else to keep in mind. It also means I can make this really short and it zooms up super duper fast right at the very beginning and then stops and holds for basically the last frame and a quarter. So again, it can be pretty helpful. It's something you just kind of have to mess around with. Let's see. What else? Oh, one thing that is an absolute lifesaver. So let's say you have a crazy panel and it's got tons of detail and it's so beautiful and you just love it. Oh my God, look at that detail. Look at that beauty. And then you realize, oh God, I have to draw it again. And you start crying and it's painful and you want to give up. You don't want to be a storyboard artist anymore. Luckily, you're not drawing on paper. You have what's called Smart Add Panel. All you have to do here is click this thing that shows the 3 pluses and it asks you what layers you want to duplicate to the next panel that you make. So if you keep both of these checked on and you hit OK, it takes everything you did, look at that, it's beautiful, and it puts it in the second one completely exactly the same. It preserves absolutely everything. So it preserves opacity, it preserves layer fills, it preserves layer order, absolutely everything. It's wonderful and you should use it all the time for everything. Basically, it means you can set up a background and then duplicate that background. Yeah, it's completely different from duplicating a panel. So if you just duplicate a panel, especially if that panel has a camera move on it, and then I just hit this, which is duplicate selected panels, it actually creates that camera move again, which is something you don't always want. For example, let's say that I have the camera do something stupid, like go up here, and then I duplicate the panel. Now, the camera is going to zoom all the way up here, snap all the way back down, and zoom all the way back up, which is super annoying and not at all what I want. But if all I do is I do smart add panel, it doesn't worry about continuing those camera moves. It only keeps the actual information from the panel. Alrighty. And like I said, you can actually choose what you want it to keep. So let's say I have a bunch of different layers and I've got beautiful artwork that's going to get me a job anywhere I want on all of them. And it's got all these different colors and I'm super proud of it. And then I realize actually I don't want the blue on the next layer for some reason. When I go to Smart Add Panel, I get to choose what to keep. So I just turn layer C, which is the blue layer, off. And lo and behold, the blue's gone. So if you have a character exiting this, the frame, or you have something that you want to disappear on a certain frame for some reason, like something that's lifted out of the way or exits, then you just get rid of it on the frame that you don't want it. It does keep the layer, which can get things cluttered, but you can just delete it. So. And then something else that can be kind of useful, this is more of an editing thing that you might not worry about too much, but if you have something that's more or less finished and you want to play around with the actual position of certain scenes within something, you can actually select multiple panels at once. So you can select a whole scene, which you do by clicking on the first panel of that scene, holding shift and clicking the last panel. And then you can drag that in between other scenes. So I had it at the very end, and now it comes after the jiggling ball. Then we get the beautiful drip paintings, and then we get man on cliff as we slowly pan towards sky. There are a couple things to be careful of here. So if I click and I drag, when it looks like this, there's like half of a green, I don't know, end to a frame there. If I let go right now, it adds these two scenes together into the same scene, which is not something you always want because it messes with your camera. But when it looks like this, it looks like a little green bar. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 scenes. If you get confused by having by how many scenes you have and you really want them to be apparent, you can actually set a color for your scenes. All you do there is you right click on panels. So you select the panels you want, you right click on them, and then you can make them whatever color you want. I don't really use this, but it can be useful if you really need to. I did use it for the other one because I had flashback scenes, and so I made those blue. That's about the only time I would use it, but some people really like to use it. What else? Let's see. Oh, that's a super useful one. Also, you basically have light table functionality built into Storyboard Pro. This is something that you probably shouldn't be using in thumbnails, but that you'll definitely use when you're doing roughs or cleans if you're going towards an animatic. So if you start with a character who's just kind of standing there smiling and you want the character to move, it's obviously a humongous pain in the butt to keep character model. Like what if he just gets gigantic and he grows like gigantic teeth and you think, well, did he have horns on the last one? And I'm pretty sure he was pretty buff. So he had like big buff arms. And then you go back to check, you're like, oh no, it was just a smiley face. Why did I add all this? Luckily, you don't have to worry about that because you have this. Up here is toggle onion skin. When you turn it on, it gives you a view of your previous panel as a little red thing. So you can actually keep things in, you can keep things pretty clean and pretty on model if you really need to. So we can say, aha, I just want him to turn over here. And then we cheat and use vector programs to fix our horrible circle. And now he's just turning a little bit. Now, if for some reason you need to have something that's super duper animated out for whatever reason, and you want a bunch of different layers, then you can also change the number of previous layers. Yeah, if you want to add, you can add more panels, or you can actually just click on a panel that you want to change, and then it gives you a little indication when you hover over the side of that panel that you can actually make it longer. You can make it as long as you want. Or I think you can make it down to, yeah, 1/10 of a second. So all you do is hold on to it, and then you can make it longer or smaller. Now, if you're like me and you try to make stuff super short, then you might think that you've totally deleted that layer. You haven't. You can actually zoom in right here. So I can zoom way out or zoom way in. And if we zoom way in, we can see that that layer is in fact still there. And again, you can just drag it, make it longer or shorter. So like I was saying with the onion skin, if you click the red stack here, you can have up to 3 of the previous layers shown. So here we have 1, 2, 3 previous layers shown. And you can also do that with layers that are after this layer. So the green indicates after, red is before. There is a way to extend this even further where you can have even more onion skin layers. I don't know why you would ever use that for storyboarding unless you are really making a finished animatic. But I don't know how to use it, so I'm not even going to pretend to know. Kevin might know more than me on that one. One thing that is super duper important with onion skins that can get insanely annoying is, let's say you have a background, and again, it's a beautiful background, and you are in love with it, and you've labored on it for way too long, and Kevin told you you wasted your time on it because it's actually not good. Then you go ahead and let's say that you have it on a couple different layers. When I look at the onion skin, now things are getting super duper cluttered, and it's really annoying. There's a couple ways to get rid of this. First of all, if you click this on, then it registers that as a background layer, and it won't show up. So even though I have a layer on the previous frame that has all of this background information, when I go to the next layer, as long as it's indicated as background, it doesn't show up on the next layer. Or if you're like me and you always forget to do that, you can just hit this, which is toggle selected layers only. And what that does, which is absolutely wonderful, is it only shows you the onion skin for the layer that you have selected. So in all of these, I have A as the layer that I have my face on. And in all of these, no matter which one I go to, it only shows me onion skin for that layer, which is amazing. And I use it all the time. You can actually do that for multiple layers too. So if for whatever reason you had a second character and you had that across multiple and you wanted for some reason to change what they're doing, I don't know, there's some sort of amoeba that's creeping closer to kill the other character, then as long as you have the layers that you want to look at selected, well, you have the toggle selected layers only on, it shows you both. It's not like Photoshop where it's super stingy with layers and you can't change multiple layers at the same time or see multiple layers. You can do whatever you want with them. Although grouping in this is not very good from what I've seen, unless that's changed in newer patches. And actually on that, I should note, if you're coming from Photoshop and you're used to not being able to select things across multiple layers, that is not how things work here. So if we go back to our beautiful paint vomit and I select the layers that I want to change and then I lasso them, I can change all of them at once, which is amazing and I love it. And you can scale things really quickly that way or do little changes across multiple panels if you need to. Again, it's wonderful. Let's see. So far, so clear for everyone? Awesome. Perfect. So something else that can be super duper helpful let's say that you have a character that is in front of a really messy background. It might be a background that has a lot of detail in it for some important reason, or you might be like me and you just draw things really scribbly. But it's super duper important for that character to stand out from the background. There's obviously always the option of lowering the background opacity to make things easier to see, but there's some absolutely amazing functionality built into Storyboard Pro. Let's see if I remember how to actually do it. Yep. So all the way down here under layer and then all the way down to generate auto matte. This is one of the coolest things in the world. When you click this, it brings up a little query window that asks you the radius and matte color that you want. So let's select a cool, awesome matte color. We'll do like ultra blue and hit OK. It automatically fills the drawing that you did on a separate layer for you, which means that you can go through and every time you draw this character, as long as you more or less close your lines and then you generate auto matte, you can separate it from your background with any color that you want. A lot of the time that's just a gray, especially if you're doing a storyboard that only has one character in it. But you can even color code things like I like to, where one character is always blue, another character is always purple, and it's super fast. You don't have to fill things in manually by hand. This is incredibly intuitive. And even as messy as I draw, it is super duper good at finding exactly what it needs to fill and filling it for you. And actually, the important thing to remember here is there's that radius. So if I have a pretty big gap, let's zoom in on this. So if I have some sort of weird like moon shape and then I leave the end of it open a little bit, and then I go in here and I hit OK to fill it, see, it doesn't fill it all the way. Although if you zoom in, you can see it sort of filling around the edges. You can, of course, just close that gap and then it fills it for you, no problem. Or you can pump the radius up to something crazy like, I don't know, 100, and it fills it for you anyways. So even if you have lines that are open on your stuff and you don't really want to go through and figure out where your open piece is, you can just set your radius really high and it'll fill it for you automatically. It's wonderful. Again, stuff pretty clear there. Hooray. All right, so let's see. A couple other kind of cool things. Something that took me forever to figure out, but which can be very useful is there is the option for super simple animation, like tweening animation in Storyboard Pro. So if I start with a character here and I want to move them over here, but I don't want to have to draw them a whole bunch moving smoothly across the screen because that's a massive waste of time, then I can go down to this thing, which is not at all intuitive, called Layer Transform. When you click Layer Transform, it brings up this crazy looking panel that makes no sense. But down here, it says keyframes. This is keyframes for animation. So what happens is, if I press plus, and then all the way up here, there is an option to go to the last frame on a panel, which basically just means you go to the very last possible point on that panel. And I press plus again to get another keyframe. I can now move this character from one position to another. And then if I go in on my camera, they move. Hooray! So if you just want something like a door sliding open, I'm not sure if there is. I'm not sure if there's a graph editor. What do you mean by graph editor? I might not know what that is. I don't know anything about After Effects or Maya. Maybe? I don't know. I don't know much about animation other than making, I believe there's something analogous to it, but I have no clue how to use it. I believe somewhere in this menu, when you have this selected, basically as long as you have layer transform, which is actually just animation selected, there should be an option to actually edit things more specifically down here. I don't know why you would use that for the most part, but it certainly could be useful if you have a big smooth animation you need to do. I just don't know enough about it to say anymore. I will say if you really want to, though, you can also edit character size, right, so they can get further away. So it starts big and gets small and gets big again. It's pretty much the same thing as using your camera stuff, except that this time it actually changes the size and position of something in a layer rather than the size and position of something or of the entire camera frame. One thing I will say here that is super duper frustrating, if I make a matte for this, afterwards, it will in fact keep that matte going with it. But let's say that I'm not paying attention and I make a character here that I have, and then I fill it, and then I animate it from here to here. Oops, see, I even did it on the wrong thing. Well, this still gets the point across. It is super duper finicky about what layers you have selected when you do animation. So here, I made only the matte move because I didn't have both selected. What's even worse is if I select both of these, and then I do that same song and dance again, and then, so now I can have them moving together, right? So they move, and that's all great and wonderful. Now let's say that I go in and I'm not paying attention and I change the position of this. Now they don't move in sync with each other and things get super confusing. Try as much as you can to do like sliding animations like this when you have not done your mats, and then add your mats in afterwards so it auto animates it for you. Although you might end up doing what I do and forget all the time anyways, and then have to tear your hair out and try and figure out how stuff works. So, oh well. Let's see. What else is useful? There's a couple other things that could be useful. So far, again, stuff making sense. Any questions? Yeah, animations stay within a panel. I believe they do not go outside of an individual panel. So it's always stuck within the single panel. But as per usual, you can just make that panel really long if you really need a long, smooth animation. So when you want to do a vector delete or change, what you do is if you have a brush or the pencil selected, you hold Control, and then it brings up this little lasso icon, and that's what allows you to, whoops, I'm on the wrong layer. That's what allows you to select, and then as long as you're holding Control, it gives you the option to manipulate without maintaining scale. So you can change the size and position of things at will. Or if you hit Control X, so you're holding Control and you hit X, it deletes it. That's how I usually do it, and it's super duper precise. So even if I go in here and I am scratchy with a circle that I make, come on. And I'm like, oh, that's really scratchy. Then I can go in and select individual lines and delete them to make something that looks a little bit less scratchy. It's a great way of cleaning up work really fast, and then you can just fill in those gaps and make something that looks way smoother. And it preserves this stuff. So if I select all of this, I copy it, and I paste it to a new layer, it still remembers all of those individual strokes. It never forgets about them unless you rasterize the whole layer. Still making sense? So there is actually something else you can do. It's super duper counterintuitive and it's going to drive you crazy, but up here there is the black cursor icon as opposed to the white cursor icon. The black cursor icon is actually the selection tool itself, and that allows you to select things without having to hold control. I don't know why you would normally do that, but if you hold shift while you have this black thing selected, you can scale things linearly so they don't lose their proportions. And this is really great for making a character larger or smaller in screen as they move away from the camera. So we can start with him here, then we select this, I lasso it, and then I hold shift and make him smaller, and it does exactly like a layer transform in Photoshop, where you select the whole thing and then you have preserve proportions selected, and it keeps things exactly the same scale no matter how big or small you make it, which is super duper helpful. And like always, there's normal like rotate functionality and all of that stuff, which should be pretty straightforward if you've used Photoshop. There are other options here. There's cutter, which is kind of weird. So if I do this and I fill this guy, and then I just want to cut, for whatever reason, a single portion out. Whoops. Dang it. 1 second. Stand by. Here we go. That's how you cut a single portion out, because otherwise if you have select, you can't select a single portion. It always selects the whole thing. You're probably not going to use that very much, but there are occasionally times you might want to use it. I don't use it very often. There is also the option to do a perspective, which is super helpful sometimes. So if I select this guy, it does a slightly different thing, but it's basically the same thing as warp and distort, where you can force things down into perspective to have them fit on a perspective grid. So you can take like a stamp of a logo and fit it onto a wall or something like that if you want to. I will say one thing to keep in mind, because this is something I was bad at first, but I've gotten much better at. You almost never want to actually erase in Storyboard Pro, just because I'm not even on the right layer. It's usually nowhere near as fast or as clean looking as actually just selecting and deleting lines that you don't want. And it also can confuse the hell out of the selector. So if I delete this thing into a bunch of small little pieces by erasing parts of it, then I can no longer go through and select that whole thing. I have to lasso the whole thing. It's not usually a huge deal, but it's not as efficient. And also, if I try to actually change the size of my brush right now, and then erase, and then I try to change it again and erase, it doesn't change the size of your eraser, but it does make your brush gigantic, which is horrible. I don't know if that's changed in a new patch, but I hate it. What else? I think that's a lot of the basics. Let's see. Again, I will say just remember to save things as packed files. So always the packed file. And then the only other thing would be if you want to export stuff as something, then there's the export option under here. You have a bunch of different options. You can take things and make them into animatics by actually exporting them as a movie. You have a couple different options for how you export it. I believe MP4 and a couple of other options are available. You can export stuff as layouts. You can do a bunch of crazy cool stuff here. I haven't used a lot of these, but even if you just export stuff as PDF, which is basically a flip through, it gives you like a bajillion different options. Obviously, because I love anime, I always export stuff as legacy Japanese, but you can export stuff as full page. And then it actually basically just makes a flip book out of it, because you have one panel per page in a PDF. And as you scroll through it, it immediately just jumps to the next page. You can actually have it hide camera moves or show camera moves as separate things, but it gets confused sometimes, so sometimes that doesn't work. Jen probably knows a better way, or Kevin knows a better way of exporting stuff to make a flip book. I haven't done it myself. I usually export stuff as a movie, so sorry about that one. I think that's most of the stuff that I should cover. Any more questions? I hope the audio recorded as well. When you want to save for what we're showing for class, just go in and save as a Storyboard Pro packed file. Come on, computer, don't lag. Oh, I need to name it. We'll name it something long. And then let's find it. Awesome. So yeah, just as a final thing, so I saved this as test stuff for showing stuff, yay, as a packed file. And then when you want to upload it to Drive, one second. I believe we're meeting tomorrow to do a class and then Thursday to share thumbnails. That's, I think, what Kevin said. So this is what makes the packed file so wonderful. I have it saved as a packed file here, and I just drop it into Storyboard, or I drop it into Google Docs. It'll upload it as a Storyboard Pro zip file. And then if I exit here, and then I download this. So let's say I'm someone entirely new. I download it. And then we'll rename it so we don't confuse Storyboard Pro. Come on. Call it new shiz. And then I open it. Takes about a millisecond to unpack this because it's a tiny file. It saved everything that I did. It let me open it up in Storyboard Pro as a totally different file. And now I can make whatever edits I want. So I can just make a new layer, go in with that wonderful, horrible red, and I can say, no, this is terrible. And then I can make a bunch of angry notes for whoever it is that I'm reviewing. And I can go through the whole thing like this and make whatever edits. I can add in a bunch of new stuff. And as long as I save it with a different name and upload it again, they can look at all of these notes and decide what they like and what they don't, and then incorporate that into their own storyboard file. All right, I think that's about all I have off the top of my head. I'm probably forgetting some important stuff, but that should be most of the basics. Yeah, I think we're good to stop recording there. Thank you so much for recording that, Anna Maria.